We're going to work straight from the workbook, so there's no PowerPoint for this one because it's pretty linear. So if you'll turn to page 3B.1 in your workbook, Celibacy for the Kingdom. So if you'll go back, please, to your inside cover where you've divided panel 3 in half. And panel 3A should say eternity, and now your keyword of perfection. And so panel 3B, if you will please put celibacy for the kingdom, and we'll come back to the keyword at the end. And thank you for persevering. I know the afternoons start to get long, and sorry, the concepts are just so deep. And it's like we just keep spiraling around. Okay, we're still in the first half under the words of Christ. That means we have a scriptural springboard. So John Paul II's reflections on celibacy for the kingdom, he goes back to Matthew 19, where Jesus is having the discussion with his disciples about divorce, with the Pharisees about divorce. It's the scripture John Paul II opened Theology of the Body with. But now he takes the second part of it, where Jesus is having this private discussion with his disciples. So Jesus says to his disciples, whoever divorces his wife, except in the case of unchastity, and marries another, commits adultery. And the disciples respond, if this is the condition of man in relation to woman, it is not advantageous to marry. Here's my translation. You got to be kidding, Jesus. Like, you expect us to stay married for our whole life long and not use all these exceptions that we've come up with? And here's his response. Not all can understand it, but only those to whom it has been granted. For there are eunuchs who were born this way from their mother's womb. There are some who were made eunuchs by men, and there are others who made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. Now, I don't know about your experience, but my experience is eunuch is not a common, ordinary word. Like, most people are not talking about eunuchs at the breakfast table. Okay, maybe you guys are the exception to the rule, right? So that means we need to be very clear what a eunuch is. A eunuch is someone who's incapable of entering into a natural act of sexual intercourse. That's what he means by a eunuch. Someone who cannot enter into an act of sexual intercourse just in a natural manner. And so he's contrasting 3 different ways this can occur. First of all, those who are born this way. In other words, they have a congenital defect that prevents them from entering into a natural act of intercourse. Or at the hands of man, meaning by castration. And then he makes this startling statement. And then there are those who make themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. Notice he doesn't just say make themselves eunuchs. It's for something. It's for the kingdom of heaven. Okay, this was a shock to his disciples. Like, they could not imagine making yourself a eunuch. I like to use the analogy of going to the bathroom. Okay, what if I said to you, there's some people who aren't able to go to the bathroom because, there was a deformation when they were born, and so they're not able to go to the bathroom naturally. You're like, okay, that's possible. And then I say to you, there's some people who can't go to the bathroom naturally because they had some kind of disease, they had to have an operation, and so they're not able to go to the bathroom naturally because of an operation. You're like, okay, I can understand that. And then I say to you, there's some people who don't go to the bathroom for their whole life because they choose not to. Yeah, right. It doesn't make any sense, does it? This is what it would have sounded like to the disciples. You gotta be kidding me. Choose not to go to the bathroom your whole life? No, not that. You gotta be kidding me, Jesus. Choose to voluntarily refrain from sexual relations my whole life? That doesn't make sense to a Jew. And it's not because they're hypersexualized. It's really important. It's because marriage was the way the Jews participated in the promise made to whom? To Abraham. And what was the promise? Your descendants will be like the stars of the sky. You will be exceedingly fruitful and have many descendants. Right? So it was every good Jew's responsibility to hopefully get married and have many children, because that's the way they participated in the promise made to Abraham. So in the Jewish culture, marriage was a religiously privileged state because it was directly connected with the covenant with Abraham. So we have to understand, Jesus saying this means he breaks with tradition, big time, Jewish tradition, by exalting what? Voluntary celibacy. This is why this is so shocking to his disciples. I love the way John Paul II paraphrases what he would imagine Jesus is saying to his disciples in Theology of the Body, Audience 74, number 4. I know what I'm going to tell you now will raise great difficulties in your consciousness, in your way of understanding the meaning of the body. There it is again. I shall speak to you, in fact, about continence, and this will undoubtedly be associated in you with a state of physical deficiency, inborn or acquired by human cause. Do you see how he's making reference to those first two ways? I want to tell you, by contrast, that continence can also be voluntary and chosen by man for the kingdom of heaven. So I just want to make a little note. John Paul II seems to use continency, virginity, and celibacy interchangeably. There's a difference. I'm just going to set that aside for now just because of time. I prefer to use celibacy because it distinguishes it from, among other things, from virginity, which we talked about. Because for John Paul II, virginity has a very particular meaning. All right, so I'm going to refer to celibacy. I'm going to use that term. So I want to look at would be the significance or the significance, the sign value of celibacy. So celibacy, as we're using it here in Theology of the Body, is a vowed state. In other words, it's permanent. It's not just temporary. That's why sometimes you'll hear single people saying, oh yeah, I'm living celibacy. I'm like, really? Have you made a vowed state? So this word is often misused. Really what they mean to say is I'm living chastely. But in English, it's a little different like in Spanish, but in English, celibacy specifically means a vowed permanent state in which one promises to refrain from marriage and all expressions of physical intimacy for life. So you all know this, because this is what you're praying an awful lot about. Is this what God is calling you to? Is this the gift that God is offering you as a permanent state in life? So celibate, a sign, as we know, points to something. Okay, I have a sign here with me. Okay, so let's say you go out driving and you see the sign. It says garage sale this way. Do you put on the brakes and say, hallelujah, I'm there? No, because what's the purpose of a sign? To direct you to the reality itself. This sign is not the garage sale. This sign only is an indicator. It's a pointer to the reality itself. So what do you do with the sign? You follow the sign till you get to the reality. John Paul II says over and over and over again that celibacy, virginity, is a sign. A sign that points to what vocation do you think? Your eschatological vocation. Every person's eschatological vocation. That's the next blank. So celibacy points to our eschatological vocation. Here's what John Paul II says in Audience 75. This way of existing as a human being, meaning in the vow of celibacy, male and female, points out the eschatological virginity of the risen man. Notice how important it is that we understand what virginity is. Eschatological virginity of the risen man, in which I would say, here he says, here's the spiral. The absolute and eternal spousal meaning of the glorified body will be revealed in union with God himself. So John Paul II only mentions virginity 5 times in Theology of the Body, in this way, connected with our he only mentions like the virginity of the body, the virginal value of the body 5 times. So it's very important. Once in Audience 11, very fascinating. 3 times in the section on heaven, and once in the section on celibacy. That's why this quote's so important, because you see again, he's very consistent that our spousal meaning of the body is perfected in eschatological virginity. So this is the way I like to think of it. Someone living celibacy for the kingdom, they're a sign of heaven. Heaven. It's like a neon sign, right? When you look at me, so when you see someone wearing clerics, right, wearing a Roman collar, or a nun in a habit, automatically your mind should say, heaven, heaven. So try it with me. Heaven, heaven. Okay, looks like only a third of you want it. Okay, try it one more time. When you see someone in a religious habit, it should say, right, heaven, heaven. Great. Exactly. So next time you see Father Matthew, say, heaven, heaven, right? Because that's what they say. It's a sign. This is why you wear clerics. Because it's a sign to the rest of the world. You're saying, hey, look at me. And you will see your eternal destiny and dignity. You will see, if you look at me, in my clerics, right, in my religious habit, if you look at my vocation, you will see that your body is not ultimately destined for where? The grave and decomposition. But for glorification and, what's the word? Union with the Trinity. That's what your vocation is a sign of. Here's what John Paul II says, audience 75, number 1. Earthly continence for the kingdom of God is without a doubt a sign that indicates this truth and this reality. It is a sign that the body whose end is not death tends toward glorification. Already by this fact it is, I would say, a testimony among men that anticipates the future resurrection. Right? You, a celibate, is a testimony among men that says, heaven, heaven. John Paul II is very clear that celibacy for the kingdom is not a lack, as if you're deprived of something, but it's a fullness. So he says it's not chosen because one doesn't have any other options or because you're a loser, right? That's why Father Wynn became a priest, because he's a loser, right? Absolutely not. And yet, isn't that so many people's impression? Right? You know, you don't have any other options. But it's chosen, John Paul II says, for supernatural motives. It's not chosen for practical motives. It's not chosen because you get to have a position of power. It's chosen for supernatural motives. It's also not chosen because marriage is inferior. That has been an impression in the past. Right? That if you're really holy, you're a priest or a nun. And yeah, if you can't make the grade, well, then you just kind of settle for marriage. It's not true. It's not why you choose celibacy, because you think marriage is inferior, or that sexual relations grade the body. Right? That's the Manichaean view of the body. Body bad, spirit good. So who would want to enter into sexual intercourse? Because, right? I just want to be holy. I just want to be spiritual. I don't want any of that body stuff. It's not why you choose celibacy either. John Paul II is very clear. Marriage is the norm. Some of you will receive the gift of marriage. It's just the statistics. When I arrived, Father Abbott and I, we were talking, and I showed him the picture that I took 6 years ago of the majors that I had the privilege of spending 3 days with. And he went through, oh, he's married, he's a priest, he's married. I mean, it was so much fun seeing how God had worked in the lives of these, same number, like 25, 30 men. So I'm not going to be naive and think that God is going to give all of you the gift of priesthood. Some of you will become fabulous fathers and husbands. And so it's important to realize marriage is the norm. He says celibacy is the exception. He calls it's an exceptional vocation. So marriage and celibacy, he says, explain and complete each other, because both marriage and celibacy are necessary to have the full picture of who the human person is. Here's what he says, audience 78, number 2. Marriage and continence are neither opposed to each other, nor do they divide the human and Christian community into two camps. Right? Like you got the celibates over here, and the married people over here. That's why Father Abbott had you do that paper. on what's the interior relationship between marriage and celibacy. He is such a blessing. Oh my gosh. He is so brilliant. But these two fundamental situations, or as one used to say, these two states, in some sense explain or complete each other with respect to the existence, I think it's to the existence of and Christian life of this community. To the existence and Christian life of this community. So here's an example I like to use. If I turn this way, you can only see my left profile. Do you have the full picture of who I am? No. So that would be as if you only know me, which you only know me as a speaker. Do you have a full understanding of who I am? No, you only have a partial view. If I turn this way, you see my right profile. If you see only my right profile, do you have the full picture of who I am? No, that's who I am as a mother. Right? So everyone back in Steubenville, Ohio, when I was raising my son, that's how they knew me, was as a mother. Did they have a full picture of who I am? How could you have the full picture of Katrina Zeno? I'd have to turn, and you'd have to see the full view. You'd have to know me as both a speaker and a mom to have the full picture of who I am. That's what John Paul II is saying. We have to know, we have to understand both celibacy and marriage to have the full picture of who the human person is. Why? Because marriage is the testifies that we're made for what kind of union and communion? No, it starts with an E. Not eternal. Not eschatological. Embodied. Marriage testifies that we're made for embodied union and communion through a sincere and fruitful gift of self. But celibacy testifies that we're ultimately made for what kind of union and communion? Eternal, eschatological union and communion with whom? With God. Do you see how important that is? I like to say if we only had celibates on this earth, we'd be in trouble, wouldn't we? Yeah, we'd die out. But if we only had married people, we'd also be in trouble. Because we wouldn't have the full picture. Because you, as John Paul II is saying, you are an eschatological witness to our ultimate union and communion with God through a sincere and fruitful gift. How? Through the body. That's why as celibates, you set aside for God even the body. It's a testament. It's a prophetic witness of our ultimate vocation. Here's what is very striking about John Paul II's writings on celibacy. Both states are spousal. It'd be so easy to think, okay, marriage is spousal, celibacy is not. But he's emphatic. Both states are spousal. Why? 4 qualities. They're both chosen because of what? Love. Do you marry someone because you love them? Yeah. Do you commit yourself to celibacy for the kingdom because you're in love? Yes. They're both lifelong commitments. It's permanent. You don't take out a 4-year lease on priesthood or being a frater, being a brother. It's permanent. It's a vow. They're also marked by fidelity to one spouse. So it's obvious who the spouse is in marriage. Who's the spouse in celibate life? The church, Jesus Christ, the body of Christ. And finally, what's the last one? Yes, they are both a total gift of self in love, right? So they're both a total gift of self. This is why, again, a celibate gives even his body over to God. Audience 78, number 4. In the life of an authentically Christian community, the attitudes and the values proper. Notice he likes this phrase, authentically Christian community. In other words, you've got the fullness of the expression of the gospel. The attitudes and the values proper to the one and the other state, that is, to the one and the other essential and conscious choice as the vocation for one's whole earthly life. Permanent, right? These two states complete each other and in some sense interpenetrate. I was thinking about this, and I think there's a way in which we can say we're back to one reality, two dimensions. How does our baptismal vocation, how does human nature express itself? In the vocation to marriage and in the vocation to priesthood. Because they're both spousal vocations. And baptism is a spousal mystery already. Complete each other and in some sense interpenetrate. Perfect conjugal love must be marked by the faithfulness and the gift to the one and only bridegroom. Notice capital B, bridegroom, on which religious profession and priestly celibacy are based. In sum, the nature of the one as well as the other. What does he mean, the one as well as the other? Joseph, what is he referring to?
The two vocations.
Yes, marriage and celibacy. The nature of the one as well as the other love is spousal. That is expressed through the complete gift of self, through the total gift of self. Audience 80, number 1. In this way, continence for the kingdom of heaven, the choice of virginity or celibacy for one's whole life, has become in the experience of the disciples and followers of Christ an act of particular response to the love of the divine bridegroom. And therefore, notice this phrase, acquired the meaning of an act of spousal love. That is, of a spousal gift of self. Thank you. So what are, if God calls you to celibacy, what is that act of spousal love? That is, of a spousal gift of self, with the end of answering in a particular way the Redeemer's spousal love. This is so insightful. Because why do you choose celibacy? Is it so you can serve better? Is it so you get all your bills paid for? Is it so you don't have the hassle of having to live with a woman the rest of your life? No. John Paul II is underscoring that spousal love by its nature, what might those two words be? Spousal love by its nature is exclusive, and this goes all the way back to the beginning. Indissoluble or irrevocable, either one of those, exactly. Spousal love by its nature is exclusive and irrevocable, meaning indissoluble, that bond. And that means it's expressed in the exclusive and irrevocable covenant between husband and wife, or spousal love is expressed in the exclusive and irrevocable covenant between the celibate person and God. Because a covenant is a permanent union of persons. It's permanent and irrevocable. I think we need to remind ourselves over and over and over again that celibacy is not a denial or a repression of one's sexuality. This is especially important because of all of the sex abuse scandal. Why did we get in trouble? Because we didn't know how to integrate our sexuality with celibacy. I'm sure there are other reasons, but I think that's a very significant one. Because the temptation, I think, in the past has been to think, if I choose celibacy for the kingdom, or I'm given the gift of celibacy for the kingdom, then my sexuality just kind of has to go underground. Because after all, I have no way to express it. And you know what happens when you repress and repress and repress something? What eventually happens? Right? It finds a way out. So repression is never the answer. The answer is always integration. Integration. Katrina, what do I do with my sexual desires and eros? What's my answer? You integrate it. You integrate it. And that's a hard work. And it takes a while. What we can say is that celibacy fulfills, so what we saw at the end of the last talk, the spousal meaning of the body, through a lifelong exclusive covenant of what kind of love with God? Spousal love with God. Here's what John Paul II says in Audience 80, number 5. At the basis of Christ's call to continence, meaning celibacy, there stands not only sexual instinct, but also an awareness of the freedom of the gift. Can you see why he took the time to develop this before? In other words, you are not coerced to act on sexual instinct. This is why I asked you, is sex a need for you individually? No. Because we're not animals. We're persons. We're not indebted to sexual instinct, the sexual drive, as if, well, we just can't do anything else with it. No. The awareness of the freedom of the gift, which is organically connected with the deep and mature consciousness of the spousal meaning of the body, in the structure of man and woman's personal subjectivity as a whole. So it means over the course of your life, and especially if you're called to celibacy, you need to continue to mature in your understanding and living of the spousal meaning of the body. Only in relation to such a meaning, the spousal meaning of the body, of the masculinity and femininity of the human person, does the call to voluntary continence for the kingdom of heaven find a full guarantee and motivation. Why? Because its motivation is love. Its motivation is taking my eros and channeling it, sublimating it into a total gift of self to your spouse. Who's your spouse? The church. I remember hearing a priest say one time, he was talking to married people, he's like, you married people, you have it easy. You're married to one person. I'm married to 2,000 people. Because that's how many people he had in his congregation. It's a good observation, isn't it? Like, that's who you're married to. They are your spouse. Father Raniero Cantalamessa, in a fabulous book called Virginity, A Positive Approach to Celibacy for the Sake of the Kingdom of Heaven, which the Spirituality Year has on their book list, he says this about virginity. Virginity is, quote, more a gift received from God than a gift given to God. You do not remain a virgin to save your soul more easily, but because the kingdom, or rather the Lord, has taken possession of you, chosen you, and you feel the need to remain free to fully respond to that choice. So I like to say celibacy is not the great sacrifice I make for God. Oh, look at my heavy cross. I'm giving my sexuality to God and living celibate my whole life. God, I hope you appreciate the sacrifice I'm making for you. Do you remember at the very beginning, John Paul II said, celibacy is not a lack, but a fullness. Right? It's not the great sacrifice you are making for God, but it's a response to the lavish gift of love God has offered to you. We're reading 1 John. See what love the Father has lavished on us in letting us become children of God. And yet that is what we are. You see, it is a lavish gift of love that God is offering you to live celibacy for the kingdom of heaven, for your whole life. And you feel the need to respond, to say yes. So if celibacy is spousal, then that means that celibacy fulfills the spousal meaning of the body, and that celibacy must be fruitful. Spousal meaning of the body. Put your pens down, will you, for a moment? We're made from one nature, embodied in two ways, for the purpose of union and communion through a sincere and fruitful gift of self. That's why fruitful is in that definition. Because spousal love, to truly be spousal, is fruitful. Okay, have I just said, okay, you could just kind of put your celibacy aside and, go out and have a little fun. No, it's not what we're saying. Here's what John Paul II says in Audience 75, number 2. Only Mary and Joseph, who lived the mystery of his birth, meaning Jesus' birth, become the first witness of a fruitfulness different from that of the flesh. That is, the fruitfulness of the Spirit. As a celibate, what kind of fruitfulness are you called to? Fruitfulness of the Spirit. And audience 75, number 4. Only little by little did it consciously take root that for the kingdom of heaven, a special significance attaches to man's spiritual and supernatural fruitfulness, which comes from the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, and which, in a specific sense and in determined cases, is served precisely by continence, and that this is precisely continence for the kingdom of heaven. Here's the bottom line. There's no such thing as a sterile Christian. Do you know what an oxymoron is? It's 2 words that don't go together, like jumbo shrimp. Okay, that's kind of ridiculous, but we use it, don't we? Or working vacation. Like if you're on vacation, you're not supposed to be working. Sterile Christian is an oxymoron. If you're a Christian, if the Spirit of God is permeating your interior life, then you're called to bear fruit. John 15. By this is my Father glorified, that you go forth and have many, many children. No, it's not what it says. That you go forth and bear much fruit. We're all called. Okay, so I like to use the analogy of a magnifying glass and a prism. In Phoenix in the summer, okay, it's stinking hot. Has anyone been there in the summer? Okay. It's like it can get up, the normal temperature, like in June and July, normal is like 110. Right? That's normal for us in those 2 months. It's like an oven. And if you ask anyone who lives in Phoenix, is it hot in the summer? They'll say yes. Okay, do you need me to say it Celsius? Like, okay, it's like 48, 49. Yeah, it's 50 degrees Celsius. Okay, that 48, 49, that's normal. Yeah, it's hot. So I say that. So let's pretend we're in Phoenix on a hot summer day. It's 48 degrees. It's like 110. And I take this magnifying glass out and I shine it on the sidewalk, right? What's the magnifying glass going to do with the light and the heat? It's going to focus it intently in one place, and woe to that poor little ant, right? That happens to be walking by because zap, he is no more. This is, for me, the image of married love. It's a good image. What does married love do? It takes your love and it focuses it and it shines it intently in one place. That's what married love is meant to do. Oh, but celibate love is different. Celibate love is like a prism. If I take light and I shine it through the prism, what happens? Right, it refracts, right? It diversifies into a spectrum. This is celibate love. You are called to take your love and shine it through the prism of your celibacy, and it is spread across the spectrum of whoever God brings into your life. Right? It's not intensely focused. This is also helpful for those who live the single life. This is what I'm called to. I'm called to prism love. Right? You didn't know it, but I've been praying for you for 6 years. You didn't know that, did you? Because ever since I was here in 2013, I have never stopped praying for Father Abbott and this seminary. So when Father Abbott emailed me, like I hadn't heard from him, we hadn't exchanged any emails, communication for about 4 years. And he emailed me about 6 months ago, Katrina, would you be interested? I'm like, yes! Like you've been in my heart for 6 years. Why? Prism love. Right? Because that's my call as a single person. I'm called to be fruitful. Right? To shine my love through and let it grace and gift people across the spectrum. So, single, celibate are called to prism love. So here's a summary paragraph. Audience 60, number 6. Man, meaning male and female, is able to choose the personal gift of self to another person in the conjugal covenant, in which they become one flesh. And he is also able to renounce freely such a gift of self to another person. Is celibacy a kind of renunciation? Absolutely. Is it a deprivation? Never. So there's a difference between renunciation and deprivation, right? You're renouncing the good of marriage. If marriage wasn't a good, we'd all be celibates. I mean, our culture's trying to do that, aren't they? In the sense of trying to cohabitate and not commit themselves to an exclusive covenant that bears fruit. So, but is able to renounce freely such a gift of self to another person in order that by choosing continence for the kingdom of heaven, he may give himself how? Totally to Christ. On the basis of the same disposition of the personal subject, meaning being a person, and on the basis of the same spousal meaning of being as a body, right? You are your body. Male and female, there can be formed the love that commits man to marriage for the whole duration of his life. But there can be formed also the love that commits man for his whole life to continence for the kingdom of heaven. Isn't that beautiful? Did any of you who wrote your paper on marriage and celibacy, did any of you find that quote and use it? It's a beautiful, how are they interwoven? What's the answer? What's the interior relationship between celibacy and marriage? What is it? Spousal love. They're both expressions of spousal love. They're both further specifications of our baptismal vocation. So here's how we could summarize it. Celibacy is a sign, right? And so what that means is when I see a celibate, I don't stop at the sign. Because what's the sign saying? Heaven. Heaven. So we don't want to get all caught up in just stopping at the sign. Because celibacy is a sign of total and spousal anticipation on earth of our glorified eternal, and what would that word be? Virginal bodily state and perfection in eternity. You are a walking, breathing sign of our eschatological perfection. Whoa! I have to tell you, I have come to love celibacy. Remember, who was it who asked me what audience I like to speak to? Who asked me that question? Was that you, Sean? Do you remember? Did you ask me? Like, who do I like to speak to?
No.
Okay, someone asked me that question, and remember what was my answer? You. This is one of my favorites. Because we get to cover everything. And I don't have to hold anything back. Because your vocation and mine, even though we're not married, it's still spousal. We still get to pour ourselves out in love. It's such a privilege. Oh my gosh. So John Paul II in Vita Consecrata, would you please put an A on the end? It shouldn't be consecrat. Should be in Vita Consecrata. Have you read any of Vita Consecrata? Oh, incredible. Okay, it's on the consecrated life. So I've actually given you some quotes in the back, so you can be even more enriched. He says this in number 16. It is the duty of the consecrated life to show that the incarnate Son of God is the eschatological goal toward which all things tend by conforming one's whole existence to Christ in an all-encompassing commitment which foreshadows the eschatological perfection. How will we be eschatologically perfected? In virginity. So here's the way I would describe it. Celibacy for the kingdom reminds us that what is not ultimately destined for the grave. The body is not ultimately destined for the grave and decay, but for glorification and eternal union and communion with the Trinity. The body, not just the soul, the spirit. That's why your body is walking around consecrated, the celibate person's body. Walking around consecrated, set apart for God. So my final description, celibacy for the kingdom is an exclusive and irrevocable gift of self to the Trinity in anticipation of the future resurrection, right, the eschaton, in all the fullness of one's bodily and virginal being. So what might the key word be? It could be But it's something else. Because what is it to live celibacy? Oh, a sign. But what kind of a sign? Eschatological sign. That's the key word. Because every time you see a celibate in his or her habit, what are you going to think? Heaven. Heaven. This is why, and this is complicated. John Paul II has a section of this in Theology of the Body, but we don't have time for it. But he talks about why St. Paul says that celibacy is superior to marriage. It's not because you guys are better. It's because it's an eschatological sign. It's because you're pointing to our ultimate perfection. But remember, we also need marriage. And that's why we're going to cross over the 50-yard line. Woohoo! Hallelujah, tomorrow. And now we're going to start looking at marriage. So tonight, I'm going to come to your recreation time. Hope it doesn't disturb any of you. So that if you have questions, ideas, things you want to just kind of talk about, I'll be there. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. So, bring your notebook if you want to recreation, and happy to discuss. Okay, God bless you.